You're listening to Were You Still Talking? Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. A quick show note. The Zoom meeting kept having interruptions, so when it sounds like I'm talking over my guest, it's really just Zoom having a problem. It's not me, it's Zoom. So I do a little more editing than usual. You might not even notice this, but I thought I would jump in and let you know that when she gets cut off, it's the meeting, and sometimes the recording worked and sometimes it didn't. All right, back to the show. Hey, thanks for listening. This is Joel Albrecht, as always, and today on Zoom I have Becca Lory Hector. She was diagnosed on the autism spectrum as an adult and has since become a dynamic autism advocate. Bit of a tongue twister. She's a consultant, speaker, and author with a focus on living an active, positive life. Her work includes autism and neurodiversity consulting, public speaking engagements, a monthly newsletter, monthly musings, and a weekly YouTube news show, Neurodiversity Newsstand, and being an assistant editor feature writer for Spectrum Women magazine. Becca has published multiple articles and books about life on the autism spectrum with the goal of spreading acceptance, building understanding, and encouraging self-advocacy. Becca left nonprofit to pursue dual certifications as a certified autism specialist, CSA, and cognitive specialist, BCCS, and to open her autism and neurodiversity consulting business. An animal lover with a special affinity for cats, Becca spends most of her free time with her many animals, her husband, and their emotional support animal, ESA, Sir Walter Underfoot. Sir Walter Underfoot travels, does woofing engagements, and has his very own Instagram, which I follow. Really amazing looking animal. How's Colorado today?
It's beautiful today. It's beautiful most days. I'm not going to lie. It's really very pretty here. And I live up in the mountains, so I don't live in a city or anything. I live in the wilderness of Colorado, and I love it. Yeah.
There's only one city to live in there, isn't there?
Well, there's two. Boulder, if you want to count Boulder and Denver, okay. I guess. We have a few.
You can almost count Boulder.
Still, I live far away from neighbors.
That's nice. That's nice. So if we have internet troubles, it's because she lives far away from neighbors. Don't worry about it. I'll edit it out anyway. And how, this is the question I always have to ask for my wife and also myself, because we follow Sir Walter Underfoot. How many animals do you have now?
A lot. I have 6 cats inside. I have 2 cats outside. I have 4 dogs and 2 snakes.
Wow.
That is the current house, yes.
All right. No, that's nice. That's great. And what kind of snakes?
They are ball pythons, both of them.
Okay. So, like, how old?
One of them's about 3. The other one's about 6.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a long time to go.
They do,
very
yeah.
Unexciting creatures.
But they live a long time, right? They live like 20, 30 years. Yeah. We have 2 cats, and now we have a pet scrub jay, which he's wild, but he likes to eat peanuts out of our hands. That's also on Instagram. Also, thanks a lot for your work. I mean, I really appreciate what you do. I think it's pretty rare. I know it's got to be a challenge. And yeah, it's got to be a huge challenge. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of people doing the kind of work you do. I did see that you are on a lot of people's podcasts that is what they do. So I like to put it out there to more people, especially because you were diagnosed, as an adult, and there might be a lot of people who still don't quite understand what they're going through. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, like, how were you diagnosed? How did that come about?
Well, about 8 years ago. So right now I'm 44, but when I was 36, I was in a place. So I sort of, at 33, I quit my 13th job in 15 years. I had done well in college, but was struggling in employment like nobody's business. I could pick up any skill set. They were all very different jobs. But once I kind of had mastered the skill set and I started to notice the people around me and their social things and stuff would get confusing, or I'd get frustrated, and my direct bluntness would come in the way of things. And so I'd end up quitting or getting fired. And that's just kind of the routine. So I would have a job for 3 or 4 months. then I'd lose my job, I'd be out for a few months, get another job, and it was just this recurring cycle. So I didn't have a career, I just had jobs, just trying to function as an adult, quote unquote, is supposed to, right? And I was trying to do that very much. But that last job at age 33, I had what is known within the autism community as a burnout. I basically was in a meeting with my boss and his boss, and I was asking for an accommodation about my schedule. And somewhere in the middle of it, I kind of realized that I wasn't going to get the accommodation that I was asking for. And I literally heard my brain crack. Like, I remember hearing and feeling like my brain split in half. And I just walked out and left and went back to my mom's house, crawled into the bed I grew up in, and didn't come out. I spent 3 years in bed. So from 33 to 36, I was suicidal, in bed, homebound, and just kind of breathing, really. And that's it. And I was with my mom. And so I was the only child of a single mom. It was just the two of us. And so we were just living like that. And I'd had migraines my whole life. And they had always said to me, if your migraines change, if anything about them is different, always let us know, come check it out, blah, 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 all this whole thing, right? So my whole life since 9 years old, I'd sort of been in that cycle with migraines. Well, my migraines changed and I started to do all the things I was supposed to do, journal and calendar it and see what it is and this whole thing. And because I was homebound and I wanted to know more, rather than go to the doctor, I went to WebMD. And on WebMD, I started to look around for what might be going on with my migraines. I was having this smell that nobody else could smell, and it was like preceding my migraines. And so I'm looking for things. So olfactory hallucinations comes up, pituitary tumors comes up, a whole bunch of other things. And they were too scary. So I went to Wikipedia. And I started going on in there. And that's sort of like a vortex. You read the thing, you click on something on the bottom, you're on to the next one, and it just goes on and on. So I was doing that on there. And I came across something called sensory processing disorder. And I started to read about it. And I thought, well, this sounds extremely familiar to me. How odd. Like, side note, put that aside. That was interesting, And so I just kind of took that. And at the bottom of that article was Asperger's syndrome. And I clicked on that, and I had never heard of Asperger's syndrome. I had heard of autism, but I grew up in the 80s. So autism in the 80s was a very specific thing. It was white boys that either were behavioral problems in the classroom or were non-speaking. That's it. So I didn't fit any of those categories or anything. So in my head, kids that were autistic went to a separate school. They took separate transportation. We don't touch them. We get the cooties, right? It was very much, that was the mentality. We freely use the R word all over the place. There were, that's the way that I grew up, right? And so reading this thing about autism was like absurd to me. It was so crazy. But there I was reading this thing about Asperger's syndrome, and I felt like I was reading my biography. So I, not knowing what else to do, I took the link and I emailed it to my mom. I didn't tell her anything ahead of time. I wanted her to have a non-biased opinion about it. So I waited 3 days for her to check her email, and finally she does, and came into my room and said, "Oh my God, you found it. We've been looking for it your whole life. This is it. Where do you want to go and take care of it?" And that was the moment. That was the moment when my whole life changed.
That's really amazing. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things I got from that story. I mean, one is I'm a musician and an actor and know a lot of them, and we can relate to a lot of what you were talking about. Having 13 jobs, yeah, a lot of us do that. Right? A lot of us do that in our 20s and 30s. A lot of artists go through the same thing. It makes me curious how many might be on the scale. And obviously a lot of them have been diagnosed that way. Yeah, a lot of them are. So that was very interesting. And also the fact that you got something off the internet that was useful.
Right.
That's the thing that struck me.
I mean, it was lots of labor to get there, but I got there.
Yeah, because I've had mysterious problems also. And still looking, but sometimes you find some really good information on there. So that's absolutely amazing. And then, so where did you go from there? Because I'm actually very curious, like, what is Asperger's for us completely ignorant people, and how does that, is that a medical diagnosis or a neurological diagnosis, or is it strictly
These are such good
diagnostic?
questions.
Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, I was diagnosed about almost 10 years ago. So when I was diagnosed, we still used the term Asperger's syndrome. At the time, there's a big fancy book called the DSM, which is the one that supposedly all therapists use, and they're all supposed to use it for the coding of your insurance, essentially, is what the book is for. This is what your client has. This is the code we use, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But in it, we have all of the descriptors about all of the mental illnesses that we function about, right? So in there, we had separated autism and Asperger's. We had said Asperger's is like autism, but it's also kind of different. And then there's classic autism or Canner autism, which is the one that I was describing when I was talking about myself, where someone is typically non-speaking or a behavior problem or has very external stims that everyone can see, stuff like that. And that's typical Canner autism, right? And what we see with people who were at the time diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, people had generally clumped together higher IQs, tended to not have issues with speaking, tend to be high functioning is what they like to say, and things like that. Now, we're now in the DSM-5. And it's 10 years later. And in the making of the DSM-5, they realized that Asperger's syndrome is very much a part of the autism category. And really the differences aren't as easy as they were describing previously. So what they did was they umbrellaed us and they said, we're going to call it autism spectrum disorder now. And under it are all of the things. So there were a bunch of different psychological diagnoses that were under there: Asperger's, autism, personality disorder, not otherwise associated. They had all these other ones, right? But the point is, what they did was they brought out the new book and said they're all autism under this autism spectrum disorder. So all of us that were diagnosed with Asperger's can now freely say we have autism, and we don't have to say that we're this separate thing. Which really brought our community together. It was really an opportunity to stop separating us into groups and kind of use our strengths with each other in that way. So we're sort of in that place. So what is it? Well, it hides itself in this DSM book. So on a very surface level, we treat it as a psychological issue, right? That is the handbook that it falls under. However, it is also, it's called a neurodevelopmental disorder. So if you pay attention, it means that your neurology is developing differently, right? And that is very much a biological situation. That is not, right? It's very much a medical, quote unquote, situation, a neurologist situation, right? So what my answer to you is that is the floaty place that autism lies in. People tell us we have mental health issues, and that's not quite true. And people also tell us that we need a cure because we're medically broken, right? And that's not true either. And so there's been a lot of assumptions about autism. It now kind of freely floats in this space, which...
Oh, shoot, froze. Oh, it was such a good train of thought. Okay, I'm just going to wait. I know it'll come back.
Is not psychological or...
Oh, now the video's gone. Can you hear me?
Yep, I did that.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Sometimes you need to come back faster.
Yes, it's true. That worked. You came right back when you did that.
There you go. Okay.
Oh, so some of that got cut off, but that's okay. And my question got cut off. Oh yeah, people thinking that they need to fix you for some reason, that there's something they need to fix. I've always thought that was an odd response to autism, and to that.
It has a place. I mean, it doesn't come from nowhere, right?
Right.
When we were first talking about autism, when everyone was first learning about autism and studying autism, we were looking only at people who had very external challenges, right? So challenges that other people could see and experience. So someone who has a lot of really obvious stimming, or someone who has vocal tics, or someone who can't do certain things on their own and needs a support person, or someone who doesn't speak and uses a device to communicate, right? And that was the picture of autism that we were looking at. And we weren't necessarily looking at anybody else. So what they were saying is, why should somebody suffer like this, right? In this way, we should look to fix it, right? Because that's the population that they were looking at. Well, come to know, when you talk to the actual people who are actually autistic, suddenly they're not really suffering, right? And we talk instead about our experience with the world and how misunderstood we are, right? So people who are non-speaking are often assumed to also be low IQ. They're also assumed to not be able to communicate in any way. Lies, 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 right? Put them on a computer or put somebody with a phone or an AAC unit and they can communicate up the wazoo. Some of our best writers in the autism community cannot be verbal, right? They can't speak. And that doesn't mean that they're not in there, right?
Right.
And so what was happening is we were suffering from people trying to fix our supposed suffering.
Yeah,
right?
I thought we learned all that from Rain Man.
Well, kind of, except that Rain Man stuck us in that one stereotype for life, and now we're all
Right.
Rain Man, right?
Yes,
but,
yeah.
That's part of it. But, it's like there's different components of it that weren't being thought about. And now that we're learning more and information is coming out and we're researching and all of this stuff, and people like me are getting diagnosed that can articulate our childhood experiences, right? And we're learning all of these things. What we're finding out is that autism at its very base is just another way of being human. And that's it.
That's very interesting. I mean,
as we're peeling it apart,
yeah,
it's just becoming that.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because I don't know where I've heard this theory. I don't know where I got this exactly, but there is some speculation that it's actually an evolutionary change. Have you studied that at all?
In every community, we have, I think, people that are a little bit extreme. And there are people, I think, that within the community that are so very, very desperate for us to be seen in a positive light instead of as a problem that needs to be fixed and cured and a squeaky wheel and all of these things, that we're always looking to explain the positives of being on the spectrum. And in an effort to do that very early on, we had a lot of people who were saying basically that autism makes us the next X-Men, essentially. Like, we're going to be the next race of humans that's superior evolution. I don't know. Maybe we will. Maybe as the COVID crisis continues and our world changes, maybe it will become more accommodating to autistics, and then we will have more success as a community. I hope that's the case, right? But are we genetically inclined to be a superior being? No, I don't think so. It's not that the way that we are is better. It's just different.
It's just different, right? Yeah, I was thinking more of not necessarily superhumans, but evolution is very clumsy, and maybe our brain is maybe the human race's brain is changing a little bit. Evolution is very slow, so maybe some people are, and this has probably always been true, but we haven't seen it because, like you say, people that had this. That were like this were just put away forever. I mean, how many thousands of years?
How can we ever know, right?
Yeah, how can we ever know? Because they would have been put away, in prisons not very long ago. They would have been put in institutions.
Not very long ago.
Like 50s,
60s. Right.
Yeah.
We just recently closed some of the worst of these places, right? Like, just recently. It's a little scary when we think about how recent it is, right? And there is the possibility, of course, that this is a step. We also, evolution it is sloppy, and there's missteps in evolution, and there's failures in evolution, and there's successes, right? And that's the way that it all processes out. But I think what we're seeing now is that and this is a little bit woo-woo, so you can ride me with this one if you want. But I think as a society, we're moving more to be so tech-based. And that everything is becoming more accommodating, more convenient, right? And in that process, autistics are finding success because we're accepting different and we're accepting a new way of doing things. One of the things autistics struggle with is doing a 9 to 5 office job, right? And for years, that was the only way to work, was
Right.
9 to 5 at an office job,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Now we're in a gig economy, and gig economies work great for the autistic brain. Working from home works great for the autistic brain, right? Anything that kind of helps us with our struggles, our challenges, works for the brain. It just so happens that our society is swinging in a direction that really assists folks on the spectrum. That's really to our benefit. And COVID fast forwarded a bunch of it for us. Thank you very much. For example, I was one of the few people that I know that had managed to pull off working remotely for myself as an accommodation to my autism. And I'd asked for remote accommodations in regular jobs before and had been denied. That's not how the company does it. We've always done it this way, blah, 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 right? Well, suddenly, pandemic, if suddenly everyone can't all of a sudden do their entire business remotely in a week, it took a week for them to do that. And when all of us were asking for disability accommodations, it couldn't be done. But when money was involved, boom, if we can't get it done, right? So it's now a world that's leaning even more towards a more accessible way of living for autistic folks. So I think we're seeing also the number of folk that are willing to talk about it come out. So it's like happening at the same time, and it just happens to work really well together. I don't know that that was anything to do with evolution, though, but we'll find out. We'd have to stay alive a lot longer to find out.
I guess part of that question comes from, well, for one, you've actually studied it more than anyone else that I've talked to. And there seems, I understand that there's way more people diagnosed with it every year. Like the number goes up every year. So I've also wondered, well, is that because they have a new book now, and right. It's recognized now, and parents are looking at their kids and going, oh, maybe this is autism, So is that a big part of it, or are the numbers actually are they rising beyond, beyond that explanation?
It's a multi-phased answer. So those numbers that we're talking about, right? They come from the CDC. Mm-hmm. The CDC numbers come from a very specific study that's been ongoing for quite some time. That's why we have that continuation of numbers. But the only ones that are being counted in that study are people that were diagnosed by 8 years old when they began that study. So if you weren't 8, the year that they started that study, your number isn't going to be counted in those final numbers. They're only looking at 8-year-olds. Interesting part of it, okay? The other piece of it that we're seeing is our information load about autism. As we're moving on, and obviously as other autistic people are speaking and they're participating in research and we're learning, information is changing. And so when we find out all of a sudden that somebody who is a very good speaker, I was hyperlexic and hyperverbal as a child, so I spoke all the time and I was reading at college level before I was really in school, right? But I have autism. But they weren't looking for me because I was talking. I was using big words. Right? And so all of a sudden now we understand that someone with that profile can still be autistic. So of course you're going to have more numbers. We're also getting better at diagnosis. We used to only diagnose children. We used to only diagnose children between 4 and 6. We now diagnose children as early as 2, right? And we can diagnose adults until the day before they die, right? And so we are learning, and those numbers are being counted, right? And those numbers are increasing because our diagnosis is getting better. It's getting more available, the diagnosis. It's getting more commonplace. It's losing its stigma. All of those things are happening at the same time. So all of them lead to more people getting diagnosed and higher numbers, right? But what we're still not seeing is a real count. So I can tell you those numbers are most definitely fake. Not fake as in like they're making them up, but fake as in they're not accurate. Because adults that are getting diagnosed in adulthood are not being counted. There are folks who can't afford a diagnosis right now. There are folks who don't have English as their first language that don't get a diagnosis. Most of our communities that are suffering in poverty don't get diagnoses because an autism diagnosis is not covered by insurance. So whatever age you are, you have to pay out of pocket. My diagnosis cost me $6,000. So if you're an adult and you want a diagnosis, and it's going to cost you $6,000, your first question is, well, what is it going to get me? What do I get for my diagnosis? Nothing. We mean nothing. Nothing. If you're lucky, you'll be annoying enough and like just on it enough to get yourself SSDI. Maybe, right? If you can fight that fight and put in the paperwork enough times. But we don't have supports. We don't have services. There's no true accommodations. There's nothing that an official diagnosis of autism does for you as an adult to benefit you. And it costs you $6,000. So we have a bunch of people who self-diagnose in adulthood that are also not being counted. So that's what I have to say, is that it's logically, yes, that number is going to continue to go up. Of course it is. Our testing is going to continue to get better. We're going to know more about autism, and that's going to help more people be identified. Hopefully, people like me and then do the work that I do will help beat down the stigmas and the stereotypes so that even more people can think about themselves underneath there and not avoid diagnosis because it's a bad thing to get, right? Nobody wants an autism diagnosis, right? And so that's sort of the idea, right? It's like, how do we grow and change that? And as we're doing that, our numbers will go up. Of course they will. And also, hopefully, we'll make it affordable and we'll be able to count some of the other folks.
That sounds very similar to the COVID diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
For somehow. The other thing, when you were talking about, it also sounded like for you, I mean, it's great that people do have places to go now to get support, and it sounds like for you it was actually a really positive thing when you realized what was going on, because you're no longer in your mom's bedroom, and you've been able to do a whole lot since your diagnosis.
I think it's one of the greatest myths about autism is that autistic people don't like being autistic, or that they don't want to be autistic, right? No, non-autistic people want us to be non-autistic. We don't want that. Okay. We like being autistic, right? It's everybody else who wants us to not be autistic anymore. And so it's sort of like, how do I describe it? It was a relief. It was a validation. So it was like multi-phased when you're diagnosed late in life. When you know as a kid, and the kids that we're seeing who are getting diagnosed as kids, they grow up with their diagnosis. It's in their house. It's part of their vocabulary their entire life. That's why we talk about early intervention so much, right? But for those of us who were diagnosed late in life, it was however many years undiagnosed that you live, you spent that time living through the trauma of people invalidating your reality all the time. And so what it is you're autistic and you experience the world in a certain way, but because neurotypicals assume that everyone processes everything the same way, we must be broken. It must be wrong, right? So I am somebody who in particular is very light sensitive. I can't go most places without my sunglasses, right? Mm-hmm. And it's painful to me, like literally painful to me if I don't have them in really bright light. As a child, I was told I was being dramatic. As a child, I was told I was making it up. As a child, I was told I was exaggerating, right? And that meant somebody telling me that what I was experiencing was an untruth, right? And that's invalidating. Do that for 36 years, and suddenly you don't believe in yourself anymore.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And the word the word for the rest of us being neurotypicals, that almost sounds like I don't know. Yeah, some of us might not want to be so typical, but it's interesting. It's interesting labels put on anybody. Now, here's one of my really silly, bizarre questions. Elon Musk, you think he's on the spectrum? Oh, did I lose you, or did I just lose your... Uh-oh. Gone. Well, I'll have to edit that out. Terrible question anyway.
I am so sorry.
That's okay. I asked a really silly question and then you were gone. I thought I was
I
just
heard the question and I was so excited to answer it,
okay.
whether I think Elon Musk is on the spectrum. And I want to say, kind of hope not. He's a little scary.
Oh, okay. See, I thought it would be encouraging for people
I don't know. I mean,
if they thought,
there's some
but
part of
it's
me
hard to
that
say.
feels like he's diabolical in some way.
Right. I can see that. I can understand that. But I think a lot of that, it seems to me, a lot of that is because he has no social skills. I mean, he's proven that over
Some
and
of it
over
is
that
that
he
he has
just,
limited social skills. Some
yeah,
of it, I think, is that he has a lot of money, so he doesn't have to have social skills.
right. And then that
So,
started very early in his life. Yeah, he's had a
right.
lot of money for a long time. So that definitely can make people lose a lot of skills. Yes, that's true. I just always wonder about that guy because, yeah, as he
He's
maybe
a lot to
died.
wonder about.
He's like the
I
evil
wonder
genius.
too.
He's definitely like the evil genius.
Right,
Yeah. Wait, is he
exactly.
going to save the world or is he going to destroy it? Yeah.
Right.
What's happening there? Absolutely. There's a lot to wonder. Jeez. So, let's see, do people treat you differently? And how do you want to be treated?
Yes, people treat me differently, but only when they know that I have autism. So it makes for an interesting thing. I'm somebody who now, obviously, I live openly and loud, autistic, out all over the place. So if you've known me for 5 seconds, then you'll know that I'm autistic. It's no longer an option for me. But it used to be.
Hmm.
We use a lot of the same language that the LGBT community uses. So I passed for a very long time as neurotypical. I can still mask my autism and pass as neurotypical if I want to, but it's exhausting and I don't want to. I like who I am and I like the way that I am and exist. And I don't think that anybody gets to tell me that that's not okay unless I'm out in the world killing millions of people. Right. And so that's something that I had to get used to. That's something that had to come to be. But the thing that people used to say to me all the time, these are the pitfalls. So I'll give you the pitfalls of autism conversation. Someone tells you they're autistic, do not say, you don't look autistic. You sound foolish. Because I will say back to you, really, what does autism look like? And there
Right.
is no right answer for it because we all look like other humans. And so it's really a crazy thing. The other thing is it's sort of invalidating again. It's sort of like, you can't be right about your own autism. Well, that's sort of messed up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And because you think that I'm not autistic, I can't be like, right? And so that's sort of an odd way to respond also. And yet it comes out of people's mouths as though it's a compliment,
Well,
right?
it's
As
like
though
someone
the
saying, "Well, you
last
don't
thing
look."
you want to be on this planet is autistic. Thank God you don't look autistic,
Yeah.
right? That's the way that it's said. And that's pretty terrible. It's a
Yes.
pretty terrible way to start out a conversation with anybody, right? But that's what happens, right? The other thing that happens is, and this one's my favorite. Oh, it's so fun for me because sometimes I get to play a little bit with people, right? And so I say, I can say I'm autistic as part of the conversation, and immediately we get what is called infantilization, which means that people treat you like a child. So I could have been having a deep political conversation with somebody and mentioned, by the way, I'm autistic. And the next part of the conversation is, oh, can you hear me? Or do you want me to repeat what I said? Or are you okay? Can we, right? And it's like, wait, you were just calling me an idiot 2 seconds ago for believing in whatever, but now I'm
Hmm.
autistic, so I'm a kid and I can't take care of myself, right? So that's part of the stigma, right? Being autistic doesn't mean that I'm incapable of self-care, right? It just, my self-care looks different than yours, but it doesn't mean that I need you to talk slower to me now because I told you I'm autistic. So that's another fallacy. And then I think the last one, and the one that we're really pushing right now, is the idea that it's rude to call someone autistic. Like people always say, you shouldn't say autistic. No, you shouldn't say someone's autistic. You should say they're a person with autism. Well, no, for a couple of reasons. First of all, autistics like to be called autistic and it's our choice, so screw you. That's part of it, right? And that's a big part of it. But the other part of it is that being autistic is part of our identity, right? It's so much a part of who I am, because our autism, our brain, right, processes the whole world for us. Any piece of information that's coming into my person is going through my autistic brain, right? I'm autistic all day long, and guess what? I'm autistic when I'm asleep and dreaming too, right? I'm autistic all the time. So it's not something I take with me. It's something I am. I can't be like, you know what? I'm not going to take my autism with me today. I'm not going to be a person with autism. I'm going to be a person without autism today. Can't do that. It's not an option. So to say to someone that they can't say that they're autistic, or that you should say person with autism, is actually wholly backwards and also rude. So that's the other piece of the whole thing, right? So those are the pitfalls that I think most people, without any meaning to be rude or with any malintent at all, that they tend to do. That tend to be the knee-jerk responses.
It's interesting. It's because it's like someone saying they're Indian, and
Right.
the Caucasian person will say, you mean Native American, right?
Right.
No, actually like, Cherokee, if you want to get more technical, it's
right.
it's like,
like
no,
really?
no. So I completely understand what you mean. Yeah, it's like someone else. It's kind of like someone else choosing your labels.
Yes.
It doesn't go well. It's the problem I have with the PC movement. I mean, I'm totally behind a lot of the stuff, but when you start pushing things on people, that's where you get a lot of pushing back. Labeling is one of those things. It's really difficult to deal with. And I can totally understand people, I get your point about how you could pass as an idiot, or what do you call it?
Neurotypical. Yeah.
Neurotypical.
Yeah.
Because, there's nothing you can point to unless you know you, and you said, I'm autistic. It's definitely.
Yeah, and I mean, the things that are telltale signs of autism, things like not making eye contact, can be faked, right?
Right.
Like, I don't look at people in the eye. I look at them right between their eyebrows.
Oh, interesting.
Eyes are weird. They creep me out. It's uncomfortable to look in the eye. So I cheat. Why? Because it's easier than having someone tell me that I'm not listening because I'm not looking at them in the eye, right? And so there are lots of little coping and masking mechanisms that autistics do to pass as neurotypical. Things that, for whatever reason, matter to the social neurotypical brain, but do not matter at all to the autistic brain, like eye contact, right? And so it's an interesting thing. It's like, when you're autistic in today's world, you learn as a child to translate your autistic brain into neurotypical brain so you can communicate with other people, right? But now that our numbers are growing, it'd be awfully nice if some of the time neurotypicals did some things the other way and they translated the other way. But what we're finding out is that the neurotypical brain doesn't have that capacity necessarily. To do, it's easier for autistics to translate into neurotypical and that way, and then take it in as neurotypical and translate to autistic, right, inside themselves, than for the neurotypical brain to do the opposite. We don't know why. My guess is because autistics have been doing it since they were children, and it's much easier to learn a foreign language when you're a kid, right? And so that's where I think it comes from. But it'd be nice if the world was a little bit different than that,
and I wondered that when you were saying it too. Is it just the way our brain was trained? As little kids, we're taught certain things. We're taught all the social cues when we're really, really, as soon as you can walk and talk to another person, you start learning all this stuff that you think the other person is supposed to act like. You would make you could do acting very easily because you've already learned how to. Yeah. You already know how. You're already faking it when you look at someone. I mean,
it's one of those things. I studied theater from when I was 8 to 18. Right?
Okay.
Why?
Yeah.
First of all, because obviously I wasn't very good at giving people what they wanted, right? And I couldn't figure it out. So when you took theater classes, that was an easy way to experiment with embarrassing yourself and experiment with different ways of being and kind of get in the habit of putting on that mask and doing those things. The other thing that it did for me by accident is that it really gave me the ability to connect my brain and my body, which is something that the autistic brain struggles with. And so I have lots of issues with coordination, and I have issues with my facial expressions. But when you're in a theater class, those are exactly the things that you work on, is your facial expressions and the emotions and how you're carrying your body and how you're using your voice, right? And so unbeknownst to me, I was doing my own therapy, right? I was doing all the things that they would have therapized me for now through theater classes. And that was a really, really lucky thing. The other part of it is that theater people are weird. And so when you're weird, hanging out with other weird people is a really good way to hide, you know?
Yep, I absolutely know. Yeah. I love hanging out with theater people because they're weird. And you know, most people that get into theater and do a lot of theater, and it translates into film too. Film people are even weirder. I mean, yeah, then you because then you not only have the weird actors, but you have all the crew and someone that's going to spend their life working that hard on that kind of it's artistic project and doing things no one else really does. Yep. They're different, you know. They're very, very different types of people.
The truth is that's exactly the kind of, when we find autistics that have had success in life, they have found a place where their strength and their interest and the job match. So when, for example, really famous autistic, John Robison, written a bunch of books. He was an engineer for metal rock bands, a sound engineer, because his sound sensitivity and his pitch is perfect and all of these things. And he's so detail oriented. So he was a fantastic, like, at the soundboard, right? And magnificent at it. So nobody gave him a hard time for being different because he was really successful at this one thing. Well, what happens when the one thing you're really good at is so weird that you can't find a job, right? Or that kind of thing, and you can't find the place. Autistics hide in the most interesting places. A lot of them hide in those kinds of really specific jobs, really specific skill sets. But the other place they hide is in the university community, where they get to major in their favorite thing and talk about it all day long and teach it to people that have to listen, right? So they hide there too, because that's another place where the autistic strengths are what you need for the job, right? Is the ability to talk about the same damn thing every semester. Right.
That makes a lot of sense because I've always wondered how people do that for their entire life. Not only teach university, but most people who are teaching at a university have gone to 10, 12, sometimes 14 years of college. Yep. Even after they start teaching, they love school. They love that atmosphere. And that that makes way more sense to me, that it's because they feel right there. That feels comfortable to them, to keep learning and do a ton of reading. And, when you're teaching other people, you don't necessarily have to relate to them.
Nope. Yeah. Especially not in a college environment, right? That's totally up to you if you want to be a professor that takes questions or a professor that doesn't, It's certainly, it's up to you and your way of being. And I think that in and of itself makes it a comfortable environment. But what we aren't doing is saying to autistics, what's the comfortable environment for you? Or what do you like? Or what do you want to try? Or, hey, Bobby, I know you're only 8 years old, but you seem to really like blocks. You want to look into architecture or something? You know what I mean? Like, instead of taking those kids and saying, well, let's work with what you love and what you're interested in and let that thing get us where we need to go. They don't. They're told not to do their special interest. It's taken away from them as a punishment and reward system, right? And it's used in a way that you would use to train an animal, right?
Oh yeah, right.
Same concept, right? Instead of saying, hey, this is the thing you're really good at. It's the thing you really love. It's where you want to put your energy. How can we use it, right? What if mom spends some time, learning about Thomas the Tank Engine so that she can have a conversation with you using the language that you want to use, instead of complaining that your kid only wants to talk about Thomas the Tank Engine and doesn't have normal conversation, right? Because it's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I've thought that about education kind of in general, for anybody. We everything is so structured in the educational system, even at home, even when you're little kids, everything, and you're supposed to, the other thing that blows my mind is people expect you to have a dream when you're 8 years old because they hear about, a famous person who started doing whatever they're doing. For me, it's drummers. I hate drummers that say, well, I started at 3 years old. I'm like, I started at 19, so no wonder you're so damn good. But it's not being so structured and letting people do what they want, I think is something that could help in the entire education system,
think
for
about
anyone.
how many of us wouldn't hate school so darn much if we were allowed to do what we loved, right? There's a reason that I had a 4.0 in college and that I could barely graduate high school. Because in high school, I was bored out of my mind. Half the things we were learning about, I didn't care about, right? And then all of a sudden I'm in college and I'm taking my major, something that I love, something that I want to do a lot of. And holy goodness, if I'm not good at it all of a sudden, right? Because it's being geared to me. And I can take the amount of classes I want every semester, and I can take certain classes with other ones, right? Mixing my hard and easy. You have no control over that prior to college. None. They just don't let you. They want a cookie cutter situation.
Yeah, and that it really amazes me. I was in a special, like an experimental program in grade school where they were kind of gearing us towards going to junior high, and they were letting us go to different classes rather than just stay in a homeroom and decide what we wanted to do more often. And it's really sad that didn't keep up. That more people don't try these different ways of learning.
Right.
It's kind of like, it's also, I think, one of the reasons people get so up in arms about giving money to education. I don't think there's any better way to change the world than giving money to than giving more resources to education. Right. But if the education is just the same for everyone and people aren't learning that well, then it doesn't necessarily work. So I completely see what you're saying. I mean, yeah, and especially someone who is different in any way, and they want to learn differently, and everyone learns differently, actually. I mean, my wife is an artist. She's a very visual person, and I'm a very technical kind of person. So just everyone has a different way of learning. So yeah, it makes sense that let people do what they're interested in. I mean, it also comes along with people give gamers a bad name, like which I understand. If your kid's because when I grew up, even 10 years before you, and when our parents got bored with us, they said go outside. So that was our go outside and play. We didn't have a game. A TV had 3 channels. There was nothing to do but go outside and roughhouse with each other. And so I do understand the concern about people spending all of their time on a gaming console. And the other side of it is some of those people are getting really smart because a lot of that stuff is not easy to figure out. And
if you think, see, I sit on the fence about screen time, especially because in my particular community, screen time is very much a way for us to connect with each other, a way for us to connect, socialize, all of those things. So I'm not a big fan of curbing somebody's screen time. But what I do say is I want us to think about it a little bit differently, right? We all think that the way that we grew up is somehow the magical right way to be, right? Because we were thrown outside because our parents wanted us out of our hair and there was no choice. Clearly, the being thrown outside is the way to go. And so if you're being thrown to your basement on a video game instead, that's wrong. Right? But no, it's the same behavior, right? It's not safe to throw our kids outside anymore. Lord knows it wasn't safe back then either, right? But our parents thought that it was, right? They would be like, okay, well, when you see the street lights come on, it's time to come home, right? Yep. That was the rule.
Yep.
Right? And like, that's a crazy thing, but that's what we did, right? And if you think about it now, if we do that now, we're the crazy parents. You're going to let your kid be outside alone without supervision when it's getting to be evening time? Are you crazy? We would tell someone they were a poor parent if they did what our parents did, right? And so every generation, every group is going to have the thing they think is the right way to parent, and then the thing that they find out they were totally wrong, and the next generation is going to do it their way, right? You go back, my grandmother had her right way of doing things too. There was, and the way she let her kids play. But what we have to do is grow as a species. We have to times are a-changing. Technology is a big thing. If your kid doesn't know what they're doing on technology, they are going to be at a loss when they get out into the world because everybody else does, right? It's not like how I remember when we were first getting computers, right? And it was like a big deal if a kid got a computer, right? Well, now if you don't grow up with a computer, you're like growing up without an arm, right? You need to enter the workplace these days with an assumed skill set of computer knowledge, right? And it will soon be that the social networking portion of business, when those kids grow up, when they want to have side conversations, they won't be golfing. They'll be playing video games.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it was a real eye opener when everyone had to go to school on a computer. I mean, it's a big change for the world, and it also is
right. And so, who are we in a place of judgment? All right, coming back. There we go.
Okay, there we are.
Okay.
But I mean, it was amazing that people figured out so quickly how to teach on the computers, but then it did leave people out because there were, thousands of kids who can't afford a computer and maybe especially one good enough to watch a class on, because you have to have a certain level of internet. You have to have something that's good enough to at least to look at the internet and that's up to date, so that everyone's not watching you through your camera when you're in class, so it's a big adjustment, but definitely it's a skill set that everyone is required to have now. I don't know if that's good or bad. I kind of fell into it because of my interests. I learned computers a long time ago just because I wanted to do stuff on a computer. But now, it's more like you have to learn. Think about that,
right? If somebody had cultivated that interest in you, somebody had said, oh, you're really good at computers and you really seem to get it and you're like interested in it, that very well could have been a career for you, right? And that very well could have been a very profitable career for you, considering the time that you were coming up in, right? But it was the new thing. Can't trust that. Right? Too new, too scary. So nobody, right? But that was the mentality, right? These days, I think parents would say, hey, learn that new skill. You never know what you're going to need, because that's the world we live in now, right? We don't live in that safety bubble that 70s and 80s were, where everybody had a job. They kept the same job at the phone company for 40 years. Then they retired, right? It's not like that in the world anymore. And so we have to accommodate, and we have to teach our children in that way. We have to teach them for the now, not for the what was.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The only thing I was talking about with sending people outside is that fresh air is very important.
Oh, yeah.
That's all. It's more like, movement and seeing the sun and talking to trees and things. That's important stuff. But that's the other side of that, is you got to set a little bit of time aside. Statistically, the only reason the world looks scarier is because there's more news about the world.
Definitely.
It's actually safer. Yeah, we know more. But as far as incidents, per population, the most areas are safer for kids, which is interesting.
Yeah, when my parents were throwing me outside till the lights were on, we were talking about all the people out in the white van. Don't get kidnapped by the white van guy, right? Because that was all the news we had. We had that one scary thing, and that was the one scary thing.
Right.
Now there's so many scary things.
And we had no idea how many of those white vans were around.
No, everybody had a white van. We all had the same white van.
I mean, we didn't know as a society how many of those people were actually out there, because it turns out now, when we look back, it was a lot of them. It's I'm watching shows about the serial killers in the beginning of that study, and it's really scary. It's like no one had no police communicated with each other, so they had no idea about that was happening all over the country.
Same thing.
Yeah. Yep. All different people.
Your kid out till the lights come on.
Fortunately, there was only 30 or 40 of them, so as far as the entire populace, your chances were still pretty low, but no one knew about them at all.
When we didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about it in school. No. It wasn't all over our news. Nothing.
No, and we didn't watch the news. I mean, that's something I didn't start watching the news till 9/11. That's when I started kind of being glued to the news. And a little bit, I lived in Los Angeles, and we had 3 different massive incidents where the things were on the news 24 hours a day. Earthquakes, fires, riots, those kind of things, which so that's when I kind of start. But as a kid and a young adult even, I never watched the news at all. It wasn't interesting to me. And now I watch the news knowing it's completely wrong, or
Right.
not,
And just to get mad about it.
Just to get mad about it.
Yell at it for being wrong.
It's like my news says the things that I'll get mad about, and the other side's news says the things that they'll get mad about, and most of it's wrong. If you really research the story, it's like, well, you got that totally wrong. When if there's ever a story that you're close to, which has happened to me, like I knew the actual story and I saw the national news story, I was like, whoa, that's not even close. What?
And then everybody's believing that story. That's the story everybody knows.
That's a scary thing, is that everyone believes that story. So if you put out a story that, COVID-19 is not very dangerous, and that hits the news, national news, and perhaps it is very dangerous for certain people, then it causes a huge problem. It causes a huge, huge problem. We're seeing that now. I mean, even people in the news talk about how it turned into entertainment. News shouldn't be entertainment exactly. I mean, it can be entertaining, but
you hopefully would hope there's some fact in there somewhere that keeps it from being a cool graphic on the screen. But you never know. And I think that a lot of that did it. I remember though, it sort of beginning with the Challenger explosion. When the Challenger explosion happened, they got their own graphic. It was like the first time that a news story had its own little graphic on the TV. I remember just being like, this is so weird. Why, what is this happening? And I feel like news started to change around then.
Yeah, that sounds about right. What I have it explained to me by news people. It's when cable hit, and instead of having 3 news networks, which were actually funded by the networks, they did not need any funding. They didn't need advertising dollars. Didn't matter. They ran ads, but it didn't matter to them because the networks funded them, because that's I think there was some kind of government regulation that said if you're going to have a big network, you're going to have a half-hour news show every day. And so the news was they were independent, basically, and they reported, they really dug into stories. Plus they had weeks and even months.
Right.
Where now we have seconds. So cable hit, this is a total tangent, but cable hit and suddenly there's not 3 news networks, there's 10. And now there's, there's everybody on the internet is a news network. Right. And that turned it into a competition where if you don't get the story out immediately, you're behind and you're no longer news somehow. And that's where it turned into entertainment. And now it's just, I can go on, but I won't.
I know. It's terrible. It really is. And it's, I work with a community that it's fairly easy to take advantage of, right? That really wants to believe that what people who say they're supposed to speak the truth aren't speaking the truth. And that's just not the way the world is. And we get a lot of folks who, like when COVID started to come out, and it was early in the beginning, it was a lot of mixed messages. There was no idea what was really happening, because they had to come out so fast. We have to tell it before we know it, right? It was the mentality.
Yeah.
And it freaks out people, the speed at which the information is coming. And often at that time, it's usually cross-hatching. So it's like they're saying opposing things from each other all over the place. And there's no way to kind of decide what's real. How do you figure out in that mishmash what is the real and what should I do to protect myself? And so I ended up telling a lot of people, like, stop watching so much, like stop doing it so much.
Right.
Because part of it is that if you sit there all day long, you will see a new news story every 10 minutes if you want to. But if you wait, you check it in the morning and then you check it in the evening, if it was important enough for everyone to be talking about it, you'll find out in the evening. It'll be there. Somebody will be talking about it. And then you miss out on the little fly by night stories that are unimportant, right? The other thing is to just pick 1 or 2 places that you like your news from and just stay there. Like, stick with your news. I followed the CDC. I felt like, they're not great, but at least they're better than what I would consider the majority of entertainment news stations. So I followed the CDC and I followed the World Health Organization, because those ones were the ones that felt like they were giving out actual information that would be helpful to me in the now, right? Rather than speculating or assuming or whatever. And by doing that, I didn't have to take in all of the nonsense that was out there. I just had to take in what I needed, right? To functionally get by. Because the truth is, we all have a certain amount of control in the world over a certain amount of things. And it's a pretty small amount of things, but they're the things that affect us directly. The rest of that stuff is sort of out there. You can't do much about it. Worrying about it or yelling about it doesn't use your energy well or smart, and all of those things. So deciding kind of where to be and who to watch your news from, and just not to get on the wave of everybody in a panic and the need to know now, everything now.
And
right?
yeah, I think that's extremely good advice, because I try and get I watch kind of too much of it because it becomes a fascination, but then I listen to two things, was listening to them every day. I've backed off now that it's gotten worse, but there's a doctor in England. He's actually a nurse practitioner and a researcher, and he is on YouTube every day telling information. He has breaks it up longer and says, this is the actual research we're seeing now. Mm-hmm. And this is what this country's doing. This is why this country's going up. This is why this country. And so it's a lot more easier to digest, and it makes a lot more sense. And, he's using real scientific information rather than just a news story that he heard. Like, he's not, and he's trying to stay non-political. He's been very, he's obviously on one side of the politics, but he's trying not to be. Yeah.
The way that he's presenting the information works for your brain, right?
Right.
It's the amount and the way that you need to hear it. And that's what I want people to understand. All of this stuff that's out there on social media, all of the news, all of that stuff, you control what you take in. That is your job. You are in charge of what channel the TV is on, how long it's on, right? That is all stuff within your control. Can't control what the politicians are going to say or do. Next time you turn on the news, you have no control over that. But you can decide not to turn it on, right? And the hope is that you turn it on and you get the information from a place that works for you, that doesn't put you in a panic, but makes you feel informed, right? And you take in your nugget, and then you keep living your life. Because if we all just get sucked into all the different stories and theories and who's going to do it first and when it's going to be over and all this speculating, right? We're not taking care of ourselves in the now. And if you're not taking care of yourselves in the now, when whatever they're speculating about happens, you won't be well to take care of yourself in the then, right? And so I hate seeing people just so engaged and absorbed by the speculation about the future while not paying attention to what's going on in their home and their health in the now, right? It's just another way to be distracted from your real life and your reality. And so it's as unsafe as having a gambling addiction. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You want to make sure you're not doing anything in excess to where the other parts of your life begin to suffer.
I think that's a really, really good message. I think I'm even going to end on that message, because that's such a good point. And I was just reminded of that yesterday, is that right now, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of information hitting people. A lot of people are going through life tragedies why this happens, whether or not they have a family member or someone who works with it every day. A lot of us, though, are not. And we do have to remember that it is important, your home, taking care of your whole family. A lot of people are taking care of everyone around them. But also, look at yourself and, check in with yourself. Do what you need to do. To feel right, to feel comfortable. I think that's a really good message to put out there. Remember to check in and with yourself and be do things you need to do to feel good. Whether that's more gaming or taking walks.
For those parts of our lives, right?
Yes.
It's not going anywhere. All the people making the news aren't going to turn around and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we distracted you from your life. Can we help you do the laundry?" Right? That's not going to happen. You got to do your laundry. You got to keep your house clean. You got to, and the other part of it is that we're in an advantage place. There's a lot of horrible things happening right now. But along with those horrible things, you can also take advantage of the time and be positive about it. So I look at it like this. Lots of horrible things are happening, but for this horrible thing, the entire world is on pause. Like the whole world. When does that ever happen? Where the whole world is on pause and you can pause too and focus on your life, making your house better, making where you live better, making how you take care of yourself better, because nobody is judging you for that right now, because everybody else is on pause too, right? So nobody's saying, how could you just be sitting around reading a book? You should be at where? I can't go anywhere, right? And so it's a great time to take that pause and readjust. Were you living a life you really weren't happy with, but you were just in a routine? Were you, accepting things you don't want to accept anymore now that life is different? What are the things that you can use this pause for to change? Right? Or, it's a great time to shift careers for people if they're looking to shift careers, because everything's sort of rephasing and changing into different things. So I say, it's easy to get sucked into all the negative by watching all of the news. But if we separate ourselves from it enough that we give ourselves the break, we can use this time as a time to create, a time to build things, rebuild things, and create and put out into the world, because we're all sitting still and watching.
That's so true. So true. Yes, I completely agree. The only part was, how often do I have to do my laundry?
I don't know. That's really up to you. I'm in I can wear a set of pajamas for a couple of days in a row and no one cares yet. So, once a week.
Kind of wearing the same thing. Yeah. Once a week.
And that's the other thing. No one cares about that either right now.
No one cares. Exactly.
Haircuts don't matter. Whether your breath smells doesn't matter anymore. You got pajamas on the bottom. No one cares. Right. And all of a sudden we only care about the work itself. And how magical is that?
That's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It really is. It's a beautiful thing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a really, really nice episode. I hope I've put out some information there. You have a lot to say about something that I think most of the population doesn't have any idea about. So, yeah, this has been Were You Still Talking? This is Joel Albrecht, and my guest today has been Becca Lory Hector, and we have been talking about autism and the autism scale and really smart stuff. So that's what I like to do, is have people smarter than me on the show so that it can be worth something. So again, be good to each other, and a special note today, really, take care of yourself.